When we think about indigenous cultures of North America, it's easy to focus on their unique traditions. But here's a wild thought. Despite their geographical isolation, these vibrant societies actually shared some surprising common ground with cultures all over the world. And nowhere is that more evident or perhaps more fascinating than in the intricate dance between men and women. Of course, every tribe had its own flair, its own distinct ways of doing things, but underneath it all, you find these universal human themes, always shaped by the land and the people themselves. So today, let's peel back the layers and really explore the amazing, sometimes shocking, specifics of relationships in Native American tribes. Now, when it came to physical and emotional intimacy, every single tribe had its own rule book, and trust me, some of those rule books were thick. We're talking a massive web of intricate regulations and deeply held beliefs. Take the Apache, for instance. They flat out forbade any intimate contact during the agave harvest. Why? Because they genuinely believed it would make the fruit taste awful. And think about the warriors. Many would abstain from physical relations before big journeys, convinced it would drain their strength. But then you have the Comanche, almost the opposite. They often spent their last hours before a campaign locked in passionate embraces with their beloved, drawing emotional strength for the battles ahead. Talk about a contrast, right? The whole point of intimacy? Yeah, that changed from tribe to tribe too. For some, it was pretty straightforward, primarily about making babies, ensuring the family and tribe kept going. For others, it was more about men getting their physical satisfaction, with the woman's pleasure often taking a back seat. And then there were tribes like the Shoshone and Comanche. These guys had some seriously strict codes. They could even dole out brutal punishment if a woman didn't keep her knees together in public. Imagine that level of scrutiny. But it wasn't always about rules and restrictions. Intimacy frequently wove its way into profound ceremonies. Let me give you an example. The Mandan tribe had this incredible buffalo calling ritual. During it, young women and girls adorned only in animal skins would bring food into the elders' lodges. Once the tribal leaders had eaten their fill, these young women would then escort them into the forest. There, the elders would engage in what were considered ritually significant acts of pleasure. There was even a specific custom, believe it or not, that stipulated one woman was expected to attend to at least 10 elderly men throughout the night. Though, to be fair, that rule wasn't always strictly followed. Sometimes the elders, perhaps a little past their prime, would simply offer prayers in the woods for a good hunt instead. And here's another detail. Kissing during intimate moments was often avoided. The belief? It was to protect the health of future generations. Wild, right? Now let's talk about the dark side, sexual assault. This was universally condemned as the most heinous act, carrying punishments that could go all the way up to the death penalty. But here's where it gets complicated. In practice, victims or their families often accepted a form of restitution, a payoff from the perpetrator, and that would close the case. To be fair, by Native American standards, that compensation was often pretty hefty. Still, each tribe had its own nuanced approach. For example, some young Apache men would, believe it or not, coerce women who had rejected their marriage proposals into intimate acts. And here's the kicker. After such a humiliating event, it wasn't uncommon for the woman's family to then offer the perpetrator a marriage, an offer he'd usually snap up with pleasure. In the Zuni community, A man accused of such a crime would typically face a public trial. And the verdict? That came directly from the victim herself. If she demanded his life, he was executed. No questions asked. But as we've already seen, most victims actually opted for significant material compensation. Then you have the Ojibwe women who lived under a very real, palpable fear of violence. And get this fear was often stirred up, even instigated, by the local shamans. Here's a truly disturbing peculiarity. The shaman himself would sometimes be the offender. He'd first warn a woman of an enchanter, about to possess another man and visit her, only to then appear himself as that very enchanter. In theory, a woman couldn't even refuse him, because the shaman was seen as the most powerful and threatening man in the tribe, and if caught, he could always wiggle out of it by claiming his body had been temporarily taken over by a spirit. Oh, and one more grim detail from this tribe. Dishonoring stepdaughters was also a characteristic practice, with the ultimate punishment often being the expulsion of both the mother and daughter from the husband's household. Heavy stuff. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. While you wouldn't find prostitution in the classical sense, some Native American societies certainly had customs that, from a certain perspective, might resemble it. Among the Creeks, for instance, it was generally understood that even a married woman retained the right to control her own body. So a Creek woman could absolutely offer herself for a night to a traveler or a guest. The Salish tribe went even further. They had a specific group of women, both married and single, who were essentially obligated to share their bed with whomever the tribal elders pointed out. And in general, polygamy was common in many tribes, and much like the Creeks, Salish women often held quite a bit of agency over their intimate choices. The practice of a man offering his wife to a guest or traveler. By many accounts, this was a surprisingly widespread custom across numerous tribes. Some chiefs would even deliberately journey to neighboring communities, knowing full well that they'd likely be presented with a charming local woman for the night. And here's the kicker. In these situations, the woman's personal consent wasn't necessarily required. The men themselves made the decisions about who would accompany the guest. A similar dynamic played out in the Omaha tribe, though with a slight caveat. If a woman's relatives felt she was getting too enthusiastic about exercising her bodily autonomy, she might actually face some form of punishment. During various festivals, the Papago tribesmen had a fascinating tradition. Specific young women were allowed to form temporary relationships, lasting just for the duration of the celebration. These young women would dance, adorned with beautiful body paint and corn leaves. Any man who found a woman appealing would take her as his partner, essentially forming a fleeting family unit. And sometimes, these short-term romances would actually blossom into permanent families. If not, the children born from these relationships were lovingly raised by their relatives as fully fledged, respected members of the tribe. And get this, the Pima people, neighbors to the Papago, even had a distinct category they called women seducers. What's amazing is that this role wasn't seen as shameful at all. These women freely chose whether to be devoted wives or these vibrant individuals who simply look forward to the next holiday to engage with a new partner. How's that for different perspectives? Despite the sometimes open nature of male-female relationships in Native American cultures, adultery often came with a very harsh price. The Hopi tribe was a rare exception, allowing a man to have a private wife in addition to his legal spouse. But for most other tribes, unfaithful wives, and sometimes even unfaithful husbands, faced severe repercussions. The reasoning was pretty direct. A man typically bought his wife through significant offerings to her family before marriage, so she was considered his personal property, and an offense against her was essentially a crime against his ownership. The Comanche, for instance, could either kick unfaithful wives out of the tribe entirely or even sell them into slavery. After that, the unfortunate woman might be subjected to public humiliation, maybe having her head shaved or even a physical beating. Eventually, though, she'd often be sent back to her birth relatives. And get this, in many cases, cheating wives were simply led out into the forest, tied to a tree, and left there. An easy meal for predators. Talk about a brutal end. Punishments, of course, varied wildly from tribe to tribe, but to be fair, men weren't always off the hook. They could certainly pay for their infidelity, too. If a husband caught his wife in another man's arms, for example, he often had the absolute right to kill both of them. And it gets even more fascinating when you look at how women reacted when they suspected their husbands were being tempted or had already strayed. Shoshone women, for example, wouldn't hold back. They'd publicly shame their rival, throwing mud, literally and figuratively, and openly voicing their disgust. The task of the scorned wife was to make her contempt for the other woman known to everyone, listing all her perceived flaws. And here's a shocking twist. A woman, in a fit of extreme jealousy, could even kill her husband. The crazy part? As a rule, there was no formal punishment for it. But here's the kicker. No one in the tribe would ever want to live with her afterward. So in essence, it was a social death sentence. After all, the man was the family's main provider, and without him, and without a supportive community, that family would simply starve.